Welcome to the Clandestine Radio Podcast, Season 2.
Good evening, curious minds out there across the internet, and welcome to the Clandestine Radio Podcast. As always, I'm your host, DJ Joswa, and tonight I thought we would do something just a little bit different. After a long and honestly at times kind of grueling 3-part series that we just got done with, I just thought it might be a good change of pace. Just maybe get in a few weird stories that I've come across over the years, breaking from our usual format of just like one story an episode, or several elements, kind of like in the Native American myths and legends one, where it was different stories, but all running across kind of the same theme. I just thought we might mix it up a little bit tonight. So this evening, I have dug deep into my research and crazy stories cabinet, it's right over here, to find a collection of tales that I haven't really seen anyone discussing. I haven't seen a lot of creators cover these stories, so I'm hopeful that maybe there's at least a few in there that you haven't ever heard of. And on the recommendation of one of you amazing friends and supporters out there, I've also got a fun little conspiracy that we're going to wrap things up with tonight. It's one that I've considered covering in the past, but I just didn't really think that I had enough real evidence to be presenting it as a full episode. But I think that it should fit in just fine with this little collection of oddities. So I've dusted off my research on that one, and we're going to have that at the end. So if you don't care anything about crazy and creepy and weird stories, just jump to the last one at least. It will start with story number 4, just for reference. And that way there'll at least be one good conspiracy for you guys this episode too. Thank you as always for coming along with us for this trip to the strange as we endeavor to uncover the unknown tonight. Season 2, Episode 7, Strange Tales from the Archives. Short little intro tonight. Just want to jump right into these things. And by the way, please forgive if I'm unable to clean out all of the background traffic sounds that you inevitably will probably hear in this episode. I think that perhaps there is a anti-muffler parade or something of the sort going on outside the studio today. I don't know what's happening out there, but yep, there's one now. Alright guys, let's get into it. So this first story definitely fulfills that promise of strange and weird. It's one that I had never heard of until I randomly ran across it one time, and I thought it might be interesting to present to you guys. To the best of my knowledge, at least everyone that lives in the area seems to believe that it is a 100% factual story. It's been going around there for decades now. There's pictures of this thing out there. If you want to go check it out for yourself, you be the judge. Story 1, Okiku. Pediophobia. No, it's probably not what you're thinking. It's actually the fear of dolls. And this condition affects roughly 9.1% of Americans. That's more than 19 million people. Usually, it's an irrational fear, typically believed to be linked to some sort of a childhood trauma, or maybe they just watched Child's Play when they were a little too young. Generally, it presents as strong feelings of anxiety, panic, and avoidance. To some, it's all humanoid, inanimate objects. For others, it's just a specific type, like the ones who move or the ones that talk, or maybe those old-fashioned porcelain dolls that are super creepy. Yeah, you know the ones I'm talking about. While different dolls seem to affect different people, and to varying degrees, it's generally an unfounded fear, with no real basis in reality to actually justify it. Some dolls, however, may actually justify that fear. Take Robert the Doll, for example, or even Annabelle, if you believe the Warrens. Both believed to be possessed by potentially dangerous spirits, while the doll I'm about to tell you about doesn't have any deaths attributed to it, and hasn't, to my knowledge at least, done anything outwardly aggressive or sinister. It doesn't make it any less creepy, I assure you. So I figured, since I haven't really seen anyone else cover this, and because it's so well documented in that area, I would share this story with you guys. Our story begins on August 15th, 1918, in Sapporo, which is the capital of Hokkaido Prefecture and Ishikari Subprefecture in Japan, where a 17-year-old boy named Kichi Suzuki was visiting a marine exhibition and saw an interesting doll that he thought would make the perfect gift to bring back from his travels for his then 2-year-old little sister, Kikuko. I've also seen Okiku being her name, and Kyoko is another one that I've seen. For the sake of this episode, we're just going to go with Kikuko for her to avoid any confusion. You'll see what I mean in a bit. And anyways, the doll is dressed in a traditional kimono-style robe and was sporting an okappa, which is a hairstyle. It's essentially what you would think of as a bob in the United States, just a short, kind of cropped above the shoulders haircut. It's a very popular hairstyle for those Japanese dolls, especially from this particular time period. Since there are several variations to this story, which admittedly made me a little bit apprehensive in covering it to start with, which is kind of why it went back into the cabinet. I honestly attribute that probably more to lost in translation and, various translations of these stories being told, kind of like the telephone game over the years. So I'm just going to stick with the way that it was most frequently written about in Japan, and try to avoid all of the Hollywoodified, westernized twists that have been put on it in later years. I've seen several of those. We're going to omit all of that. But I may talk about a few of those alternative elements, maybe in the BTR. So anyways, Akichi, knowing that his sister was going to be so excited about this gift he had got for her, he rushed home as soon as he could. He had spent the last of his money on this gift anyway, so there was really no reason that he could think of to not go ahead and head back home and give it to her. On the way home, he couldn't help but admire this gift. She was truly exquisite. He couldn't believe that he had found a doll of this high quality that he was actually able to afford. From the fine linen in her kimono to the realistic raven-colored hair, and especially her two black as opal eyes that cast a piercing gaze, almost seemed to swallow up all of the light around them. When he returned home, he could hardly wait to see Kikuko's face when she opened her gift. And just as he had hoped, Kikuko was immediately taken by her new doll, and it very quickly became her most prized belonging, and more importantly, perhaps, her best friend in the world. Little Kikuko-chan would spend every day with her. She would carry her with her proudly everywhere that she went, and laid her down beside her at night whenever she slept. She would end up treating this doll like a little sister, and talking to her. They would play together. They were really never apart. She named her doll Okiku. Sadly though, only a year after, Kikuko would fall gravely ill. By some accounts, what started as just a simple cold would develop into pneumonia. By others, she fell victim to one of the many waves of yellow fever that had ravaged the country. Regardless of the actual cause, the outcome would tragically remain the same, and Kikuko would pass away, still clutching Okiku at only 3 years old. Originally practiced by Buddhist monks who were inspired by Siddhartha Gautama, or the Buddha as he is better known, because he supposedly left detailed instructions on how to cremate his remains, and cremation would end up becoming the most practiced method throughout Japan. Some areas have even completely banned traditional burials. For Kikuko, this would be the method as well. It's tradition there that when cremating a loved one, the family and close friends will often place mementos and items that were significant during their life and that might bring their loved one some comfort on the other side, inside of the coffin before the cremation. This is still practiced even today, actually, and they have a name for those items, which I'm going to absolutely butcher, I'm sure. Fukoshin, which translates to grave goods. There are a few rules, though. It must be flammable, obviously, and it can't be dangerous, so, certain materials are not allowed. Probably can't chunk your uncle's favorite fireworks in there with him and whatnot. And also, so certain materials are not allowed. While the obvious thing to go with Kikuko would have been, of course, her prized doll, unfortunately, this didn't happen. The exact reason isn't really known. Perhaps in her family's grief, they just forgot it when they left and realized too late. Or it's possible that the crematory didn't allow it because of the materials that the doll was made from. But regardless of the reason, her best friend had to remain behind. While Kikuko surely would have wanted her doll with her, and I'm sure her family probably wanted her to have it as well, for one reason or another, it wasn't to be. So instead, her family placed the doll beside her urn that was containing her ashes on the family altar, or Butsudan. Every day, the family would pray at the altar in memory of little Kikuko. As the months went by, the family began to notice something odd, though. Okiku, the doll who had originally sported that short Okappa-style hair that went straight across just below her ears, now had hair that somehow reached her shoulders. The family began to suspect that Kikuko's spirit was now residing inside of Okiku. The doll's hair would continue to grow. Some versions of the story skip ahead here to the relocation of the doll, but for a little more context, I'll discuss some of the events that were said, at least, to go on in the meantime, and maybe explain why they decided not to keep the doll after this. The family began to have dreams. These dreams, the doll would be coming to life and approaching the sides of their beds, where they would wake up in terror just as its little outstretched hand would get to them. Soon, the dreams would not only intensify, but seem to cross into their waking life. Lights began to flicker around the home. Bangs could be heard all around the house, and strange voices echoed down the halls. The closer the date got to Okiku's birthday, or her death anniversary, the more intense things would seem to become. In 1938, the country was at war, and Akichi was conscripted into the military. The rest of the family would relocate as well, moving from Owamizawa in Hokkaido Prefecture. Before leaving, the family would decide to entrust this doll to the monks at the local Meninchi temple. It's said that they believed the magic that fueled Okiku was the proximity of the doll in their house to their daughter's grave nearby, and they didn't want to separate her spirit from the doll, so the decision was made to leave her behind. The monks had apparently heard stories that were going around the town at this time about this doll, and were said to be fascinated and happy to watch over it. Over time, they were able to prove the truth of some of these claims as well, particularly that the hair does indeed grow. They've even sent out samples of the hair for scientific analysis, and it has been confirmed to indeed be that of a human child. I feel inclined to say that human hair was frequently used in all kinds of older dolls, so I can imagine that that's probably why, but it's still kind of creepy. The monks would cut the doll's hair, and supposedly it will always grow back, reaching right around its knees, the same length that Kikuko's hair was when she passed. Wamazawa is now completely abandoned, and the Meninchi temple still stands to this day though, where it is said that the doll still resides and its hair is still growing. Since summer is the time for telling ghost stories around Japan, I felt that this was the perfect tale to get us started tonight. Story number 2, the Belme's Faces. Which this is kind of a weird one. If you've never heard it, buckle up. Our story first starts on August 23rd of 1971, when Maria Gomez Camara was in the kitchen of her home in the Andalusian village of Belmes de la Moralada. in southern Spain when she began to notice something odd. It appeared as though some odd stain had somehow materialized, as if out of thin air, on the concrete floor of her kitchen. While it struck her as unusual, she also wasn't feeling very well at the time and initially just chalked it up mostly to her current state. The next day, when she walked into the kitchen, the stain was still there, perhaps even clearer than the night before. She tried to dismiss it as just a stain left by something that her husband must have spilt and then failed to properly get up. It wouldn't have been the first time. She became more concerned, however, after repeated attempts, different products, and hours of scrubbing failed to remove it. Sitting on the floor, exhausted, she began to finally truly examine the stain more closely. And this is when, to her horror, she realized this wasn't just a random stain, but rather it had the clear appearance of being a human face, and it was staring right back at her from out of the floor. This sent Maria into a panic. Seeing the state of his wife, her husband Juan Pereira decided to take drastic action, and along with their son Miguel, went about removing the entire section of the floor with pickaxes. I guess that's one way to deal with a stain. And after that, they went about laying fresh concrete back down in its place, good as new. After all this, it seemed that things had gotten back to normal for him, at least for about a week or so. However, on September 8th, a new face would appear in the exact same spot as before. Being a small town, at this point word had spread all over of the strange happenings, and I'm sure that the village was wondering why they were beating the living hell out of the floor with pickaxes in the middle of the night. And of course, people talk, so news had spread of the strange happenings, and many had started to believe that the home was besieged by the devil himself. One, not wanting to draw any more attention probably, decided that it would probably be best to go ahead and try to remove that stain again, maybe a little bit more quietly the following night. Before that could happen, however, the mayor of the village intervened, and in an effort to calm the people of Belmes, asked that they allow the new face to be examined. On November 2nd, after visits by several experts in various fields, the face was cut from the floor and then mounted on the wall behind a piece of glass, which was done in an effort to try to preserve its integrity so that there could be more thorough testing done on it. They would also decide to dig a little deeper, so to speak, by excavating the floor beneath the house in an attempt to get to the bottom of what could be causing this phenomenon. On December 2nd, 1971, at a depth of about 2.8 meters, or a little over 9 feet, they would find one possible answer to their questions when several decapitated skeletons were uncovered. Further examination of the remains would date them to around the 13th century, but still answered very little, as no local historical accounts explained why those bodies were placed there to start with, or who they may belong to. They would be laid to rest again in a local cemetery, and shortly after, it was decided to fill the space back in and reform the floor with fresh concrete in hopes that the house could now return to being a normal, peaceful home. But they were wrong. During the following year, new faces would appear at a rate of roughly one per month. Investigators would state that they would manifest at different speeds, and on some occasions, right under the watchful eyes of witnesses, occasionally disappearing again or changing appearances. Initial investigations would be conducted by the local police, with further examinations by everyone from chemical scientists to parapsychologists getting involved. In the interest of maintaining public order, typically the Guardia Civil was present throughout as well. Most in the scientific community, and many from within the field of parapsychology as well, were initially skeptical, and various hoax claims were put forward to explain those happenings. Each one seemed to solve the mystery and prove that the faces were in fact being put there by human hands. Each one, however, would eventually be proven impossible. Various researchers from all around the world would take turns putting forth new theories, only to watch each of them fall short of truly explaining the phenomenon. While some sort of paint transfer was long believed to be the explanation, scientific analysis of the concrete where the faces had appeared, conducted by the Instituto de Cerámica y Vidrio, or the Institute of Ceramics and Glass, also known as the ICV, conclusively proved that there was zero traces of any sort of paint or pigment present in the two samples of the faces that they studied. While The finding of the study was never published in full, and it didn't indicate which faces were studied, what part of the faces corresponds to each of the samples, nor exactly what mineralogical or chemical analysis was actually performed. The ICV is well-known and well-respected institution, and belongs to the Spanish National Research Council. After several tabloids would still go on to publish stories claiming that the whole thing was a hoax perpetuated for financial gain, the curiosity around the faces of Belmes would gradually die down. But the appearance of the faces would supposedly carry on until Maria's death in February of 2004 at age 85. New faces would allegedly appear after this, but Spanish media would quickly dismiss this later wave of faces as a blatant hoax and attempted money grab by investigators and the local government, possibly missing those sweet tourism dollars that the house was bringing in for a while. Numerous theories have been put forward to explain the original events, many regarding various ways that they could have been created, though none have been able to reproduce the same results. Others focused on the more paranormal, with some believing Maria was producing the faces through what is called thoughtography, and acting as the focus person or physical medium through which the spirit faces would manifest. There have been various cases of thoughtography all over the world. Most well known in America is probably the Ted Serios guy who claimed he was able to project his thoughts onto Polaroid film, or possibly even the infamous Ghostwriter case, which was that entity that would write messages on the Polaroid pictures. I don't know why they love Polaroid so much. But to my knowledge, this would, if true, be the only case of images being produced on concrete in this way. In the end, nothing conclusive was ever proven to fully explain or discredit the Belmes faces. In 2014, a new examination was undertaken in an attempt to uncover the possible hoax by an investigative journalism TV show called Cuarto Molino. The research was conducted by Jose Graciña, a doctor of chemical engineering and forensic criminologist Luis Alamancos, who is also the director of the Spanish Institute of Applied Criminalistics and a recipient of the European Police Cross of Honor. So, two pretty qualified guys to be able to spot a hoax, I would think. After they extracted samples from the faces and subjected them to careful re-examination and chemical analysis using modern techniques, they would conclude that the images, quote, weren't made with paint and, according to scientific knowledge and techniques employed in the analysis, there is no external manipulation or elements in the faces. After attempting to recreate the faces using every technique they could think of, and failing miserably at all of them, they would summarize their opinion as, quote, absolute bewilderment. To this day, the strange case of the Belmes faces remains unsolved. Story number 3 is definitely a weird one. It's one of the few, I guess you would say, cryptid stories that I had never heard of, and I don't know how, because it was very, very big at the time, and I would imagine that somebody would have covered this, and I'm sure they have out there, I just haven't run across it. So, I figured we'd discuss it in hopes that maybe you haven't heard about it either. Story number 3, the Enfield Monster. The Shawnee people of southern Illinois had a name for the area, the Devil's Kitchen. It was given this name in an effort to try to explain the strange sights and sounds that were all too common in the region. Things such as strange balls of light, apparitions, screams in the forest at night, unexplained creatures were said to be very common. The native people often viewed areas such as this as being sacred. The early settlers in the area would more commonly use another word, cursed. It's near this area that our next story takes place, and it all started around 10 p.m. on the night of April 25th, 1973, when Enfield resident Henry McDaniel began to hear a strange scratching sound at his front door. At first, McDaniel was content with just ignoring the unusual noises, chalking them up to likely being a raccoon or something of the like. Plus, it was getting late already, and his day had been plenty long enough as it was. Still, the sounds persisted though, and even intensified, sounding almost like something was ripping through the metal mesh of his screen door. Not wanting to allow any further damage, McDaniel decided that it was best that he at least took a look outside to see what was causing all of this racket at such a late hour. When he approached the window to look outside, he saw what, at the time, he initially believed to be a bear. Alarmed at this sight, obviously, McDaniel would arm himself with his gun and a flashlight and step outside into the darkness to protect his home. As his eyes followed the beam of his flashlight all across the yard, he caught sight of something between two rose bushes, but this was certainly no bear. Standing before him was what McDaniel described as a creature with 3 legs and 2 short arms. Oh snap, it's Ron Jeremy. Its body was also fairly short in stature, but appeared somewhat human, at least aside from its gray skin and large pink eyes that were the size of flashlights. Barely able to even process what all he was seeing, McDaniel's first instinct was to shoot first and ask questions later. So shoot he did. McDaniel would fire off 4 shots at the creature, with at least one connecting. This would cause it to let out a hiss that McDaniel would later compare to a wildcat, before it took off towards a nearby railroad embankment, covering a distance of 50 feet with 3 jumps, before disappearing completely out of sight. Unsure of what to do next, McDaniel would phone the local police who would come out to investigate the incident. Authorities would report finding footprints near his home that they described as being dog-like with 6 toe pads. They would also state that McDaniel seemed fully rational and totally sober at the time of the interview. After this, investigators would branch out, speaking with others throughout the neighborhood, which is when they would speak to 10-year-old Greg Garrett, who would corroborate McDaniel's story, stating that he too had seen the creature roughly 30 minutes before McDaniel, while he was out in his backyard catching fireflies. He told police that the beast scared him, and even shredded his sneaker when it stepped on his foot as he tried to escape. Garrett later came out, however, admitting that his report was phony, and he only did it to tease McDaniel and the newsmen who were on the scene. Why, you little sh**. News outlets would nonetheless still pick the story up, with several speculating outlandish explanations such as a wild ape or even an escaped kangaroo could be to blame for the sighting. McDaniel would dismiss these claims in a later press interview, stating, quote, "If they do find it, they will find more than one, and they won't be from this planet, I can tell you that." 2 weeks would pass without much incident, until May 6, when McDaniel would phone up radio station WWKI to inform them that he had seen the creature once again at 3 a.m. that morning. He would state that it had been moving between the railway trestles near his home and said, quote, "I saw something moving out on the railroad tracks, and there it stood. I didn't shoot at it or anything, at least not that time. It started down the railroad track. It wasn't in a hurry or anything." After this call, a search party, including the station's news director, Rick Rainbow, great name, explored the area later that day and would report seeing a, quote, ape-like creature standing in an abandoned building near McDaniel's home. They would also claim to have made a recording of the cries that the creature made and even fired a shot at it before losing sight of the creature. This recording would be investigated by cryptozoologist Lauren Coleman, but nothing would seemingly ever come out of it. After this, local press would report on at least one group of out-of-town men who were arrested after police received reports of gunfire. The police would locate the group that had reportedly come to town with ambitions of photographing the creature and were carrying guns for, quote, protection. While the press reported that men claimed to have seen the creature, the White County Sheriff was quick to dismiss these claims, stating that the men were, quote, just out drinking and raising hell, saying that they only briefly mentioned the creature during questioning. Newspapers throughout the state would report on the creature in the following years. A man from Ohio would contact a local paper saying that the creature could have been Macy, his escaped pet kangaroo, and Western Illinois University would even publish a case study regarding the events as a social contagion that spread from a few first-hand accounts and grew through gossip. But no definitive answers were ever uncovered regarding this case. It was never proven or disproven, so I guess the truth about the infield monster will have to remain unknown. Which brings us to our final story this evening. Story number 4. What we really know about DIA. I said this would be a fun, hopefully easy if I'm being honest, kind of spooky episode this week. I hadn't actually intended on getting into anything all that deep this week. However, after a friend and I hope listener, hi Matt, if you're listening, this one's for you buddy, presented me with an opportunity to cover a story that I've wanted to discuss for years now anyway, I figured I couldn't pass it up. Well, I've researched this topic a few times now, and looked into covering it actually last season. I just couldn't get my hands on enough documents to give me the level of concrete proof, I guess, that I needed to make it into a whole episode. So I just kind of passed on it, and back into my cabinet of oddities it went. Since this is just a collection of stories, though, I guess there probably is no better time than tonight to go ahead and talk about it. So with that out of the way, let's discuss a fun little piece of somewhat modern conspiracy, and to do that properly, you already know, we need to go back to the beginning. Stapleton International Airport was opened way back in 1929, October 17th to be exact, which is kind of crazy to me because I really didn't even realize that commercial flights were happening at any kind of volume to necessitate international airport way back in 1929, but shows what I know. Stapleton was located in Denver, Colorado, just east of the neighborhood of Park Hill on the edge of town. It would expand several times over the years and become a major airport for the western U.S. By the 1980s, however, plans began going into motion to decommission the Stapleton Airport, or at least replace it. Several reasons were cited for this decision, such as the lack of lateral separation between the runways, which would cause congestion and slow down the loading and unloading process tremendously, and a lack of room for other airlines that wanted to use Stapleton, like Southwest and some of the ones that weren't around to start with, along with a few others that wouldn't truly be remedied by replacing it. But regardless, in 1985, the Colorado General Assembly would broker a deal to annex a plot of land in Adams County into the city of Denver, and thus giving more room and paving the way for a new expanded airport to be later built. By 1995, Stapleton would officially be decommissioned. Work on the new airport had already been underway since 1989, however. Construction on Denver International, a laborious process, fraught with numerous delays and cost overruns, with the final total estimated to have cost $4.8 billion. Before it was ever completed, though, it was already becoming a hot topic within conspiracy circles due to all of the seemingly needless changes and ever-growing costs, as well as clear evidence of a vast underground being constructed below it, with fairly clear evidence of tunnels, a significant amount of them actually, running not only below the airport, but also radiating out from it. This would spark perhaps the first of many conspiracy-minded theories regarding the true nature of the airport. Once the doors would officially open to the public in 1995, however, what was revealed to the public certainly wouldn't calm those fears, and in fact would only raise far more compelling questions and give rise to a whole new host of fears. So, let's get into it a little bit deeper, examine all of the evidence available, and try to figure out which ones may be unfounded and which fears might be rooted in a very real and possibly very dark reality, shall we? While it was still under construction, one of the first ones that I remember hearing about was how the New World Order, you already know my thoughts on all that, was behind its construction, and how the runways appear to be being laid out to resemble a giant swastika, while admittedly if viewed from certain angles from above, particularly at certain stages of its construction, and if you really squint and are just determined enough to see one, there's a very vague resemblance. Still though, if you really think about it, runways going out in all the cardinal directions, linking back to the central hub of the airport, is the design of literally every major airport. So, if you tried hard enough, I'm sure that you could find one at literally any airport. I put zero stock in the first theory. But if you want to find New World Order connections, for real though, you need look no further than the organization credited for its development. An organization that outside of the plaque, which is marking the time capsule inside the airport, would seem to not exist anywhere else and never has. A spokesperson for the airport has explained that away as being in reference to how the airport would, quote, permit access to the world, and is also a reference to Dvorak's New World Symphony. but it literally says New World Airport Commission. This plaque that's on the time capsule also has a giant Masonic square and compass with a G in the middle and includes the text, quote, dedication capstone laid by the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge F&A of Colorado and jurisdiction Claude W. Gray Sr., Grand Master, on one side of it, with, quote, the most worshipful Grand Lodge and AF and AM of Colorado, Benjamin H. Bell Jr., Grand Master, on the other. So, I guess you'll have to be the judge on this one for yourself, but if you think that they have their hand in some New World Order affairs anyway, and it literally says New World Airport Commission on it, which doesn't even exist, it's pretty weird. That's all I'm saying. Another often cited, though minor, I guess, kind of in the scheme of oddities about this place, is the 32-foot tall statue of a blue Mustang that is positioned between the two main roads leading into and out of the airport that happens to have glowing red eyes and is appropriately named Blucifer. While a giant blue horse with red eyes that shine a glowing ominous red at night and the name Blucifer is kinda strange just in and of itself, there are a few other unusual, shall we say, takeaways here. The artist responsible is Luis Jimenez, and he has credited the inspiration for it as coming from the sculpture Mestino at the University of Oklahoma, which, for the record, has its share of unusual theories surrounding it as well that doesn't really ease one's mind about old Blucifer. Many believe that its red glowing eyes, which his muse, old Mestino there, also has, for the record, are a nod from their creators to the biblical four horsemen of the apocalypse as a sort of tribute. The artists insist, however, that the color red is just a tribute to the wild spirit of the American West. Okie dokie. A strange element of it, though, maybe it's just a coincidence, is that 2 years before it was unveiled, and supposedly right after he clarified using the red in its eyes, a large piece fell off of the statue when a hoist that was holding it up failed suddenly. This piece landed on the then 65-year-old artist and severed an artery in his leg, killing him quickly. The construction of the airport itself has several odd elements. Another of those, aside from it being much more expensive than it's shown to be on paper, is that while the DIA website discusses certain buildings that were not finished properly, rather than demoing them and just starting over, they chose instead to build on top of them, burying the existing ones underneath, which feeds into another theory actually. Is there a possible headquarters for the cabal under the airport? Well, let's look at the evidence real quick. There is no doubt a massive tunnel system under the airport, including a train that supposedly only runs between the concourses, and a massively expensive automated baggage system that apparently never really functioned properly and is now completely abandoned. The actual purpose of the giant network of tunnels is really pretty vague, which has led many people to speculate that they may contain underground bunkers. Considering that Cheyenne Mountain, if you know, you know, is only about 83 miles away, there may actually be some logic to all of that after all. Especially considering many researchers claim that underground networks and even high-speed trams connecting many complexes and government DUMB sites exist. Though proving any of that is, by its very nature, a pretty tricky thing. Another element that I can't leave out is the rather unusual public collection of DIA art pieces contained inside the airport, aside from Blucifer on the outside, while probably the absolute most terrifying ones, which we will discuss in just a sec, are no longer on display and have been removed as part of a $500,000, quote, remove and restore project that's said to be related to its remodel, supposedly. Several odd things still remain. One, well, two technically, are the gargoyles perched inside of luggage which watch over the luggage terminals at the west and east side of the Jepson terminal. While they have long freaked out travelers and conspiracy theorists alike, especially since they talk and will strike up a random convo with you, they are an art installation by artist Terry Allen titled Notre Dame. So clever. They also lean into the theories, as the airport has long done, citing it as a great free publicity by saying things like, "Welcome to Illuminati headquarters. I mean, Denver International Airport." Hilarious. Just great. Now explain this f***ing mural, Greg. One of the large murals, which is now in storage, I believe it's still in storage anyway, one of many credited to artist Leo Tanguma, and it's titled "Children of the World Dream of Peace." The mural, which looks anything but peaceful on one side, is full of totalitarian and apocalyptic imagery, with a very prominent, taking up the majority of one wall of the mural almost completely, figure of a soldier wearing a gas mask and wielding a giant sword and gun, complete with a Nazi-esque armband, along with what appears to be a bombed-out city on one side, and possibly deceased children, it appears, wrapped in blankets, and a row of grieving mothers holding their dead babies in their arms beside them. As you turn the corner, another section shows another image of a large group of happy children, celebrating in traditional cultural clothing. It's said to represent the horrors of war being overcome by the dream of peace, which makes perfect sense, if you're walking that direction at least. Just to play devil's advocate for a second though, if you're going the other direction, you see a whole lot of happy ethnic children, many from countries that the globalist agenda, or NWO if you insist, have bombed the living hell out of, making the second mural, aka the world that we actually live in, make even more sense. People can find a conspiracy in anything if they try hard enough, but when taking everything else into account, I have to admit that a case for either scenario could technically be made. So I'll leave you to decide, because if nothing else, it's a great illustration of how perspective changes everything, and it goes both ways. So, from the Illuminati-looking capstone to the tunnels and even freeways that run beneath it, there is no shortage of strange elements about DIA. Well, sure, they definitely seem to be leaning into it. This is a pretty common cover technique as well in all reality, and it falls woefully short of explaining the vast majority of strange elements that are in, under, and around this airport. So as is usual in cases where I lack the hard proof and documents to back up my beliefs, I presented the evidence as honestly and as accurately as I know how, and I'll leave the decision making up to you on this one. And that will do it for this evening, a little trip through spooky and dark stories. If you enjoyed this sort of multiple story format, then please do me a solid and let me know over in the Q&A on Spotify. I'll probably throw a poll up over on the Facebook page as well, for those that don't use Spotify, I understand. Once most people have had a chance to check out the episode anyway, so you can probably expect that in about a week. If you don't follow us over there yet, by the way, what are you waiting for? Seriously though, I frequently post documents related to episodes and exclusive content. Plus we're starting to finally build a pretty cool little community over there of like minds, and we would love to have you. There's a Discord channel as well, if you can find it. It's become like a little scavenger hunt to find the right link lately, but I promise that it's out there. Shout out to Matt for the DIA story idea, again. Oh, and shout out to New Zealand too. I see you guys starting to run the place up, and it is appreciated. Thank you all, as always, for tuning in. Shout out to all the weekly listeners as well. You are the reason that I do this. I guess I'm just shouting people out now. That's a thing we're doing, all of a sudden. We'll see how long that lasts. Okay, that's it. That's all I got, guys. I'm out of here for now. But I will talk to all of you again real soon on the next Clandestine Radio.